Greetings, everyone. Well, decided to dive into some sci-fi recently. There's a little book that some of you may have heard of called Ender's Game. This came out way back in 1985. It's actually the 29th anniversary this year. Yeah, okay, so not really an anniversary celebration. But Ender's Game is a book that I had been wanting to read for a very long time. I'd heard nothing but good things about it. It's considered a modern classic of sci-fi. So I'd been wanting to sit down and check it out for a very long time. Just never got around to it. Then the movie came out. So I thought, oh, I can just watch the movie. You know, like most lazy people do these days. And then I thought, well, you know, the movie's out. I got the movie. Why don't I read the book first? Since I've been meaning to read it literally for like 20 years, why not actually read the book first and then do the comparison, see how it compares with the movie? So that's exactly what I did. Popped into chapters, just basically on a whim. I was like, I should pick up Ender's Game. I should read the book, and then I'll watch the movie. And that's what I did. So, bought the book, read it, then I watched the movie. How did they compare? Well, let's talk about that today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. Did I mention I read the book first? I just realized I was being really repetitive and redundant in that intro. I do apologize. I just get excited sometimes. Yes, so at long last, I bit the bullet and read Ender's Game. I had a blast with this book. I really enjoyed it a lot. And found myself perhaps identifying with the main character a little too much. This may come as a complete shock to you, but I was bullied a lot growing up. And a bit of a loner, kind of, you know, stuck to my own thing and did my own thing, didn't care what people thought, but got picked on a lot anyway. So in that respect, I definitely related to the main character of Ender and his isolation and, you know, feeling that, you know, having difficulty making friends and things like that, and being bullied. So I guess for those who aren't familiar with the story, I should say there will most definitely be spoilers in this review because, well, I'm comparing the book and the movie, so I kind of have to delve into specific details. So if you haven't read the book and or seen the movie, and you don't want to have things blown for you, I would suggest watching this after you've done all that. Alrighty, that's all the warning you're going to get. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. So basically the story of Ender's Game follows the main protagonist, Andrew Wiggin, who goes by the nickname of Ender, and there's a war going on between Earth and this race of aliens called the Formics. Now throughout Ender's Game, the book, they are referred to more by their slang term, which is buggers. And they're called buggers because, well, basically they look like big bugs. They're very insectoid creatures. So maybe thinking, oh, like Starship Troopers. Not really. Honestly, the fact that they're a race of alien insects is where the similarity to Starship Troopers ends. It's really not the same story at all. So basically what is going on is there have been a couple of invasions that have been repelled, and Earth is deciding to take the war to the Formics to finish them off once and for all before they can invade again. So what they need is commanders to command their space fleets. They need the Formics are very erratic and hard to sort of predict their flight patterns and their strategy and things like that. So they need commanders who are able to think very quickly, who are able to think on the fly and be able to strategize very quickly to more effectively deal with them. And what they come to realize is that kids actually are able to process information much more quickly, and with the right type of training can be formed into the types of commanders that they need. Now in the case of most of the main characters in the book, mainly follows the kids who are inducted into this training program to be, trained to become commanders. they're all gifted. They're all gifted kids. So I mean, they're very smart to begin with, but these are much smarter than the average kids. So they look for specific attributes and specific traits to find recruits for what is called the battle school. And the battle school is where they are trained to become commanders. So a good chunk of the book takes place in the battle school, and in the battle school they have sort of this game where they'll have groups of kids split up into what they call armies, just sort of small squadrons of kids, and they'll fight each other in this zero gravity room, and they have these laser guns that can basically freeze parts of they wear these special suits, and then the laser guns can freeze the suits, so that's how they register a hit. So it's kind of like zero-G paintball but with laser guns, and the reason for this is they change up the rules of the game constantly throughout the course of it to keep the kids on their toes and keep them thinking on their feet and strategizing. And Ender, the main character, as he goes through the battle school, it becomes very quickly apparent that he is quite likely the commander that they've been looking for to command their whole frickin' fleet, because he's just able to think on the fly so fast and be able to process information so fast and change his attack and defense style to match or to counteract whatever the teachers and the other kids' armies are throwing at them. So yeah, so basically it follows him and his rise through the ranks and stuff like that. But the long and short of it is, I really enjoyed the book a lot. I had a great time with it. I thought it was very fast-paced, very, very entertaining. Really found the characters engaging and interesting. Now, most of the book basically takes place inside Ender's thoughts. So you hear a lot of his inner dialogue as he's sort of sizing up situations and characters that he meets up with and things like that, and it's really interesting. You really feel like you're there in the moment with Ender, sort of experiencing things as he experiences them, and it's a lot of fun. I should mention one other aspect of the training is what was called a mind game, which is basically this shows how ahead of its time Ender's Game was. All the kids have what's called desks. And when you read the description of the desks, you realize they're tablets. They basically have tablets. This was written in 1985, but they all have tablets that they use for their studies and to play games on and things like that during their downtime between battles in the battle room, obviously. So there's a game that Ender plays just called the Mind Game, and he maybe it did have, I can't remember if it actually had a name, but anyway, he plays this game. And the game changes based on what his decisions are and such. And the game is actually part of the tests. He doesn't realize this at the time, of course, but the game is part of the tests to determine essentially how well he can think outside the box. And he gets farther in the game than anybody else. And there's a giant, for example, that he meets up with, and he has to solve a riddle that the giant gives him. And basically the giant presents him with two glasses to drink from, so two glasses of some unknown liquid, and he says, one is instant death, and one will take you to fairyland. So it turns out that the game is rigged, and both of the glasses are instant death. So in the book, Ender keeps going back and trying again and again and again. He's like, what the hell? Like, how do I beat this? Like, there's got to be a way to beat it. So then finally he just decides, I'm just going to attack the giant. So he attacks the giant, kills the giant, and that opens up the next section of the game. And that's sort of an example of how Ender thinks outside the box. I mean, most players would just keep trying to find a way around, and maybe attack the giant out of frustration. But in Ender's case, he attacked the giant as a strategy, as a way to defeat him. It's like, well, why do I even need to play the giant's riddle game? Why don't I just take the giant out of the picture and see what lays beyond him? And that's exactly what they did. Now, anyway, the book versus the movie. Now, obviously, I mean, this is a 300-plus page book. There's a lot of intricacies to it. A lot of things in the book that, for example, take only a couple of paragraphs to describe. If you were to translate those to the screen, you'd be looking at a 5-10 minute scene just to convey all that same information and to to give you the same, heightened sense of drama and tension, and to play out the strategy and such. But in the book, I mean, the author or Orson Scott Card can describe it very quickly and just sort of convey that information very quickly and move on to the next thing. So I was curious to see how they were going to adapt it in the movie, because the movie actually only runs, how long is it here? A little under 2 hours. It's actually 114 minutes, so 6 minutes shy of 2 hours. I thought, how are they going to cram all of this into a 2-hour movie? And well, the simple fact of the matter is, a lot of stuff is missing from the book. So, to me, when something is adapted into another medium, what I go into that adaptation expecting is, did they get the basics right? Did they get the story right? Is the story intact? Are the characters behaving like the characters from the source material? Did they hit all the right beats? Did they put the big dramatic moments in there that I enjoyed from the book and bring them to life on the screen? But the main thing is, does it feel right? Does this feel like the world from the book brought to life? In all honesty, with Ender's Game the movie, I would have to say yes. For the most part, yes. I think they did an excellent job of adapting it. I mean, it's a very difficult book to adapt, and they've been trying to do a movie of it for probably 20 years, sort of tossing ideas around. It's been in production hell for a while, so finally it's happened. The problem with it is, well, as I may have hinted at before, the running time. I mean, we live in a day and age where 2.5-hour, 3-hour-long movies are not uncommon. They've kind of become expected. Even for big budget action movies, they're like 2.5, 3 hours sometimes. So what I don't understand is why Ender's Game, which is based on a pretty meaty, pretty robust, dense novel full of stuff, they decided to chop it down to 2 hours. Now, I haven't listened to it yet, but I heard about it. Apparently in the commentary track for this, the director actually talks about that specifically and says he was actually under a lot of studio pressure to keep the running time down below 2 hours, to like shorten it, tighten it, make it faster, things like that. So you can't really blame the director. It's really just studio pressure, which is unfortunate, because what is there is freaking gorgeous. When they get to the command school and they're doing the whole thing, commanding, doing the simulator, it's spectacular. It is absolutely spectacular when they're there. And the funny thing is, that section of the original book is actually not very long. It's maybe about the last quarter of the book. The vast majority of it takes place in the battle school. In the movie, they actually split it more or less in half. Like, the first half is the battle school, the last half is the command school. It's a little bit more battle school than command school, but it's pretty, almost an even split. So you get, so obviously they decided to focus much more on the latter part of the book, where, things really take off, and where all the sort of big cataclysmic stuff happens. But yeah, I mean, I thought overall it was a pretty good adaptation. Now, a few key differences. In the book, Ender starts off... Actually, the book covers about almost 6 years of Ender's life. He starts off, he's 6 years old, and by the end of it, he's 11, pushing 12. And over the course of that 6 years, he grows up a lot. Like, he goes through a lot of stuff. So the book covers a pretty wide time span. Now, obviously, they can't have necessarily a 6-year-old actor at the beginning being able to give that. It's a very emotional story, a lot of inner turmoil, a lot of emotional layers to it. So they can't necessarily have a 6-year-old actor being able to convey that level of emotion. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of great child actors out there, but this is a cast full of child characters. So logically, you just can't have that many fantastic child actors that are that young to play those characters at that age. I mean, most child actors that age do cereal commercials and stuff, and that's basically what they are able to do. Once in a blue moon, you get some who, well, again, are gifted. They would literally have to have child actors as gifted as the characters in the movie to be able to convey the layers of emotion that the characters in the story convey. So that's just not realistic. So I completely understand why they went with slightly older young actors, and that's fine. They went with, preteen to early teen actors to portray the characters. They didn't get in so much. They didn't get so much into the time span that takes place over the course of the original story. They more just focused on the characters and the emotions and the interactions. A few key differences. The character of Bean. The character of Bean is introduced much earlier in the movie than he is in the book. In the book, he appears maybe about halfway through. Bean becomes a much larger focus in Ender's Shadow, which is the sort of parallel story to this. It's basically the same, takes place during the same time frame as Ender's Game, but follows the story of Bean and his experiences through the battle school and his thoughts and feelings on meeting up with Ender and stuff like that. So Bean figures into it much earlier on, and I can kind of understand why they did that. They just wanted to tighten things up, and they can't sort of get into all the intricacies of the relationships from the book because there just isn't enough time. The other thing was, in the book, in the battle school, for example, a lot of the battles and sort of key events that happen in those battles in the book occurred over several battles. In the movie, they've sort of taken those key events and condensed them down to a single battle, or just a handful of battles instead of like a dozen. And again, that's understandable, because while in the book it's fine to keep going back to the battle room and seeing more and more battles, in a 2-hour movie that would get repetitive very quickly. So I can understand why they condensed those things down. I mean, the same information is conveyed, and the end result is the same. They just do it in fewer battle room sequences in the movie than they do in the book. When they get to the command room, the simulator in the command school, in the original book, it was just Ender in the simulator, and he was in contact with his teammates over the radio, so they weren't actually in the same room. In the movie, they're in the same room. Again, a change that I can live with, because it allows them to interact a little more directly, a little more visually, and it would have been too complicated, honestly. I mean, there's so much going on in the simulator that it would have been way too much to convey to have the simulator stuff going on and cutting back and forth between all the different characters and stuff. At least having them all in the same room, they can interact together nicely, and it simplifies things and puts the focus where it really needs to be, which is on the action going on in the simulator and Ender's command skills at that point in the story. So that's pretty cool. And just one second, I actually have took some notes as I was watching the movie. Oh, yeah, I noticed, for example, when Ender is on Salamander Team, they actually combined the events of the first 2 Salamander Team battles into one battle. I talked about the mind game. The mind game, Peter and Valentine appear in the mind game in the movie much earlier than they do in the book. In the book, there's a lot more mind game sequences where Ender is going through and sort of peeling back the layers and figuring out different things. And there's a lot more about how the game is evolving on its own as Ender is playing through it. And they're seeing things that the game wasn't meant to do because of how it is evolving based on how Ender is playing. And Peter and Valentine, his sister and brother, show up in the game at one point, and it's quite a startling moment in the book, and it's a startling moment in the game too, or in the movie too. But they appear much sooner. But again, I can understand that it's just kind of to keep things moving along. The same information is conveyed; it just doesn't take as long to get there. The confrontation with Bonzo in the shower, very similar to how it plays out in the book, but it ends differently. Also, one of the big revelations in the book was that we don't find out until later that Stilson, the bully that he fights at the beginning, and Bonzo, who he fought in the shower, both actually died. And that was one of the reasons that he was taken into the command school.